Good for Thurgood, written by Marvin Bird. Thurgood Marshall was born in 1908 in Baltimore, Maryland. He was African American, and his grandfather was a former slave. By the time Thurgood was born, it was against the law to own slaves. Thurgood grew up with both black and white neighbors, but in many states, people were segregated. In the South, black people were not allowed to eat in many restaurants that served white people. They were not allowed to sit in the same train cars as white people. Black children in the South were not allowed to go to school with white children. They couldn't even drink from the same water fountains. Yet the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, had made segregation legal. It decided that those restaurants, trains, schools, parks, and hotels were separate but equal. In fact, those places were not equal, and those laws were unfair. At the dinner table, Thurgood's family used to argue about what to do about those laws. Thurgood became very good at arguing. Do you know? Thurgood was originally named Thurgood. Because he didn't like having to spell it, he shortened his name to Thurgood in 2nd grade. His nickname was Goody. Thurgood liked pranks and got into his fair share of trouble growing up. His punishment in high school was often to memorize the U.S. Constitution. "Before I left that school, I knew the whole thing by heart," he later said. Yet some of the ideas in the Constitution did not hold true in his own life. Thurgood thought the rights in the Constitution should apply to everyone. He felt that the laws in some states that segregated African Americans went against the ideas and laws put forth in the Constitution. He realized that by becoming a lawyer, he could use the law to help African Americans achieve equality. After graduating from an all-black college, Marshall wanted to attend the University of Maryland Law School. Because of his race, the school would not let him in. Instead, he went to the all-black law school at Howard University. He graduated at the top of his class in 1933. The next year, he began to work as a lawyer. In 1936, he won his first big victory for civil rights. It was against the University of Maryland Law School, the same school that Marshall had wanted to attend. Another black student had also been denied admission to the law school because of his race. That student took the school to court, saying that the school's discrimination was illegal. Marshall argued the case and won. Marshall was just 32 when he began arguing cases before the Supreme Court. In one case, he argued against segregated neighborhoods. He said that people of other races should be allowed to purchase homes in white neighborhoods. Marshall argued another case about segregation on buses and trains. He said that black and white people should be able to ride together. Marshall won these and many other cases for civil rights. In 1954, Marshall argued his most important case of all, Brown versus Board of Education. At that time, many states spent far less money on black students than on white students. Black children in those states had to attend all-black schools, even when they lived miles closer to an all-white school. Black students in crowded schools were not allowed to attend white schools with empty classrooms. In many places, they could not ride buses to school, even when a bus for white children passed their door every day. Marshall argued that it was unfair to have separate schools for black children and white children. He argued that separate was not equal. The only way to gain equality was to allow children of all races to attend the same public schools. In 1951, the closest elementary school to Linda Brown in Topeka, Kansas, was 4 blocks from her home. Yet because the school was all white, Brown could not attend. Her father, Oliver Brown, started the lawsuit that became Brown versus Board of Education. Marshall won his case. Every justice on the Supreme Court voted to end school segregation. That decision helped end other kinds of segregation in the United States as well. It inspired the civil rights movement, which took place over the next decade. It also made Marshall famous. In all, Marshall argued 32 cases before the Supreme Court, and won 29 of them. He became the first African American to argue cases for the U.S. government before the Supreme Court. In 1967, President Lyndon Johnson chose Marshall to be a justice on the Supreme Court. He became the first African American to ever serve on the highest court of the United States. Who serves on the Supreme Court? For many years, only white men served on the Supreme Court. Of the 9 justices, there were no women and no people of color. Because the president appoints each justice for life, it took a long time to make things more equal. The first change came when Thurgood Marshall became a justice in 1967. Then the first woman, Sandra Day O'Connor, was appointed in 1981. In 2013, 1 African American man and 3 women served on the court, including 1 Latina woman. Justice Marshall still got to argue a lot, and he always argued to make things fair. He upheld the rights of prisoners, children, women, and homeless people. Justices serve on the Supreme Court for life. Justice Marshall wanted to stay on the court as long as he could so that his voice would continue to be heard. Marshall served on the court for 24 years. In 1991, at age 83, he retired. At that time, reporters asked him if black people were better off than when he joined the court. "All Americans are better off since I joined the court," Marshall said. "All of them." He died 2 years later. Marshall believed in the American legal system. He believed that it was the root of equality in the country and that only the law would bring permanent change. He thought the right laws could even change the minds and hearts of some people. Thurgood Marshall changed the country not just for African Americans, but for people of all races. His ideas about the Constitution advanced justice, freedom, and opportunity for all Americans. Good for Thurgood.